Okay.
Come to me 0 times, so. Thanks for the inclusion. Last person. Well, I as an author always appreciate re-listening to audio recordings and stuff. So I don't have to figure that out. That's one of my favorite things. Thank you.
Volunteer now. I was wondering whether I might dare break the frontier.
Yeah, we're saying like whoever comes in last is good minutes. I don't know. I think if they were actually in the group before you, you were kind of like
Ran past them.
Yeah. You did wear your red shirt. Yokohama shirt.
It's time, right? Okay, so we're still waiting on a minute taker.
Richard volunteered.
Richard's doing it. Thank you.
That was funny. I got enough enjoyment out of it that I'll take the minutes.
It'd be awesome if you could both take notes and collaborate. All right, let's go ahead and get started. By now, hopefully, since this is the second session you've probably been in, at least today, note well. Please note the note well as we will be using it. And the agenda for bashing. This was posted a couple weeks ago. Since it was posted, Martin asked for a chunk of the time allows section. So if we're expeditious with the other, we'll get to hear about the emergency services work. Any agenda bashing? Okay. Then we'll start with the CERT delegation.
Was like Yoda the last speaker? Okay. Is that working? Okay, I think that's good. Hi, I'm John. We're going to talk about certificate delegation, and I have engineered my deck this time so it will not eat the entire session as it did last time. Next slide, please. So what is this? This is a working group item on certificate delegation, and it sets out to explain exactly how delegation works. I mean, there's some language in 8226 that says you can like create delegations, and you can have like child certs off of parent certs, and they can inherit some of the permissions that these parent certs possessed, but it didn't really spell out much of the mechanics of what that meant to have like an AS and VS deal with certificates like that. So this is really just trying to explain something we hinted at in 8226, but didn't actually explain. We also wanted to talk a bit about how it interacted with ACME, since we're doing a lot of ACME stuff in general around STIR. It's not a long draft, and you can probably read it by the time this talk is done if you haven't read it before. But it does support a number of interesting use cases. Probably the ones that get the most attention in the industry are enterprise and OTT cases, cases where there are entities that are kind of pseudo carriers that maybe have enough SIP infrastructure that they want to be able to sign calls themselves. But in the traditional shaken model, they don't show up as carriers. They don't look like carriers like NECA and the people who decide who gets operating carrier numbers traditionally in the United States. And so we wanted to try to figure out if there was a use for doing delegation to kind of help those entities get into the STIR shaken ecosystem. This could work as well for like end userish cases. One common one that comes up is like the doctor's office case where the doctor wants to be able to like spoof the main number of a medical facility from his cell phone, and maybe an individual cert could be kind of delegated to his phone or something that would let him do it. There's like possibilities for that, but that's not really what we're talking about at this point. Next slide.
Sorry, the blue sheets are going around a second time because a bunch of people came in after they went around the first time.
All right, changes since last time, and this reflects the interim meeting that we had over that lovely teleconference 2 or so months ago. We talked a bit about the need to articulate better how TNOP list permissions worked, because this is actually apparently something we weren't super clear about in 8226, and I guess we're using this document as a place to make sure we explain what the hell it's supposed to mean if you actually have OCNs and telephone numbers in a bucket in a single certificate. And based on the design from long ago that Russ helped out with back in the day, permissions are additive. What that means is like, you know, if a certificate contains 2 OCNs, what that doesn't mean is it's the intersection of the telephone numbers that they support that this particular certificate is authorized to sign for. It is the superset of all the telephone numbers covered by those 2 OCNs. And similarly, if you have heterogeneous resources like an OCN and a telephone number range, it's not saying like within this OCN you can sign this telephone number range. Instead, it's saying, you know, you can sign for anything that's under this OCN and anything under this telephone number range, even if they are kind of overlapping. So we just wanted to make that clear. I guess this is where we're going to end up making that clarification. Added a bit more text about collapsing the certificate chain in cases where the CA that issued a parent cert, a parent wants to delegate down to you know, a new delegate certificate for an enterprise or whatever, but really that, you know, the carrier, let's say, who controls that parent cert is going to the same CA to get the delegate cert issued that issued them their own CA, their own certificate. In that case, there may be ways to collapse the certificate chain. So I kind of explained that a bit more. There is a bit of a trade-off in that you may discard information about who the entity was that issued the initial cert in the first place. So we'd have to, you know, figure out some way to make sure that the resulting collapsed chain cert actually correctly identifies who the parent is. But there's been some interest in this rather than having like these sprawling chains of certificates that could potentially in aberrant use cases arise from delegation. And finally, I added a bit of language on subcerts. This was a TBD that we discussed a bit last time, and I think we spent quite a bit of time on it actually. And kind of what the draft does now is say, we'll get to that if we need it. In other words, okay, we're defining a delegation system here, but there could be some regulatory environment, you know, maybe if Germany wakes up tomorrow and decides we're going to do STIR, they may not like the idea of issuing certificates to carriers with CA equals true in it. And so it just kind of leaves the door open to, okay, if it turns out that is going to be possible in some regulatory environments, we should at least know that there is a plan for how to deal with that in those cases. Next slide. More stuff left over from last meeting. I did just restrict pretty much using X5U, since everyone's using X5U, and I understand there's already like PEM chains in X5U. We could use X5C. because it's designed with a specific purpose in JOT. But if people want to start doing it, that's fine. Right now, pretty much everyone is using X5U though, so I would probably stick with that. We had a big discussion last time about the good bit about the idea that maybe we should put some piece of markup in the certificate that says that the entity, the CA that issued the cert, did the vetting process to make sure that the encompassing semantics had actually been validated before it issued the delegate cert. But as many people pointed out, like, it should just do that, and there shouldn't be any need for you to say there has to be a good bit to say that you just did that. Instead, we're just assuming you did that.
So point on that is, if there is a certificate policy under which the certificate is issued, that is where you explicitly say it, not in the cert.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And so we're no longer talking about good bits for that. This does not, however, preclude if you are a VS and you still want to just double check that this particular telephone number is within the scope of the OCN and the cert that signed it. You can still do that. We're not forbidding you from doing it. We're just saying that's kind of belt and suspenders at this point, because that delegation should have been assured by the CA that issued the cert in the first place. And for now, I didn't really do anything about Acme Star. I think we're going to push that probably into the short-lived certs draft if we get around to doing that, which we probably will at some point. If we have any spare time today, we may talk about what future directions will be for work we're going to explore here. But for now, I'm not really saying anything about it in this draft. Next slide. That's it. Like, I'm not here to raise any issues. I'm not really aware there are any issues. I think we still are kind of waiting to see what ATIS is going to emit from the process it's going through right now to kind of measure ways that enterprises and OTTs might participate in the Shaken ecosystem. And I think once we have something more concrete from that, there may be just course corrections that are required in this approach. But I think this, for that reason, we may hold it another cycle, not advance it just yet. Maybe we could use that time to get some eyes on it and see if anybody has any comments. But as far as I'm concerned, basically this should be ready to advance. This was never intended to be a particularly complicated draft, just trying to explain what we meant by saying delegation was possible when we wrote RFC 8226.
So point of clarification there, are you suggesting we do working group last call now and be ready, or are you saying wait a cycle and then do working group last call?
I mean, you could go either way. I don't have strong feelings about that. I mean, working group last calls are 2 weeks and cycles are like 4 months.
Right.
So I don't think it is essential that we do that immediately, but we certainly could if that'll help get some eyes and review on it.
That's what the point was, is that usually is a forcing function to get people to actually read it. So maybe after Christmas.
Yeah, that seems good. Anybody here read it? Have any thoughts about it? I think this is the right, wrong approach. It's not really any different from the last 2 times I presented this. Okay, I see some thumbs up. I see one guy with a pitchfork, but
Chris went. A few of us are implementing it, so.
Yeah, it is being implemented. I understand that people are kicking the tires on this in the marketplace, like I said. So this is not exactly science fiction stuff. And again, it is in 8226 that you can do this. It is in some RFC we previously published. This is just really for the people who are now trying to implement it, explaining what it means to implement it. So, okay. I believe that is it on this. There's nothing. The backup means backup. And I'm glad we got through that quick, because now we have plenty of time to spend on RCT, unlike last time.
The funny part is we spent a lot of time at the interim on RCD, so I think we actually covered most of it, but I'll give an update. I think there is a couple of topics we can talk about in more depth. So actually, really, the first slide is most critical. I have examples and other things.
The first slide?
Or sorry, the second slide. So for the most part, between the interim meeting and the new draft, I took all the decisions we made and tried to incorporate all those in the draft. The big one was, and the one that we probably spent the most conversation on was sort of trying to figure out what the normative language is about, like operating in different modes. And I think we came up with essentially 3 modes, which I detail in the draft. So the first one is, nothing about integrity. We're just signing direct content into the claims, like you're directly incorporating a J card, for example, and there's no URIs or anything like that. The second one is if any of the content in the RCD claims does have any URLs, then you must sign with an integrity claim digest. So if anybody's new to that, it's a digest over the content that the URLs point to. There's a serialization mechanism that tells you which order to do the URLs and insert the content into the digest and all that other stuff. And then the third one is the case where you might have some non-authoritative users signing. So you want to use some mechanisms that are built into 8226 certificates to essentially say you must use this integrity digest in signing it, so that when the call is initiated and the RCD content's incorporated, it's tied back to the JWT constraints that were put into the certificate itself. And I guess I forget if I put a must there, but I guess it wouldn't be a must. It's if you have that scenario, if you have that use case, then you use that technique. The other big topic, any questions on that? Hopefully I captured it, how we discussed it. Okay. The next major topic is we talked about, for a couple of reasons, like compact form and alignment with other, just plain old SIP mechanisms of using call info. We wanted to create a new call info purpose, I think is the verb that I sort of read out of that of JCard. So in other words, add to the currently defined, I think it's info, icon, and card, which card really means V card in that case. So we wanted to create one that was specific to RCD with the purpose of JCard. So I submitted that draft. There's the basic, description of what we're using it for, things like that. I also went through and I incorporated, I thought maybe it was a good idea to explain, and maybe have some normative things around which properties of JCard should be used. I'm curious what people think about that. I'm actually thinking that instead of in this SIP core draft, it might be good actually to keep that in the STIR RCD draft, because other people might have other opinions for what the uses of JCard are for SIP for other applications or things like that. So I was more targeting interoperability, where terminals may want to display certain logos in certain ways, icons should be certain sizes, I didn't know how far to go there. So I'm just curious if anybody has any feedback about how far we should go with that. Is that just going to be a rat hole, or is that something we should do, or should we just do that from a industry perspective, independent of IETF? I could see that as a solution as well.
Sounds like a great opportunity for bike shedding.
Yeah. Okay. So I sent a message to the SIP core mailing list. And we can discuss it there, but I'm thinking like keeping it as simple as possible is probably the best policy there. I also gave some details about compact form, explicitly using this call info JCard. And then also display name for the name claim that's in RCD. And I removed, as we discussed, the other call info tokens because we just wanted to focus on JCard and keep it simple there as well. And that's the major changes. I don't know if there's any questions or comments about that. One thing, looking deeper into call info uses a URI as the parameter right after. So there's a question of, it's probably the case that we want to incorporate this info, like the JCard info, directly in the invite somehow. And John and I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but he mentioned there's some hacks that maybe putting in the body or something like that. So.
John Peterson. So everybody who knows me knows that my favorite thing in life is the data URL. And that it's a joke. It's like the thing I think is the most architecturally sloppy use of URLs in the history of the universe. But there are lots of ways to actually just encode bodies, right? That you can insert them into SIP requests. And there's a specific kind of my media type for CID, which indicates that you're actually pointing to a body that exists like elsewhere in the SIP message. Now, I mean, all these CID uses require my multipart. And in the past, my multi-part support has been a bit spotty in SIP implementations. So, I mean, that's not a fantastic solution. I still think data URLs are a worse solution. Probably if we had to pick something based on the way that we have dealt with these things lately, it would be just encoding it in a header, right? Like the entire thing, like, is it a base64 parameter that we tack on to call info itself that contains the entire JCard? I'm sure that everyone who's thrilled about the size of identity headers will be, very excited to see what that will happen when you have logos and icons like, being base64 encoded in these things. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think you do have to bite the bullet on if you are going to have these things incorporate large objects like JPEGs that are like 64K, they're going to be in by reference. There's just not.
Right, and I think that would be secondary anyways, because it would be, the logo property of a JCard anyways.
So, I mean, provided that we are not proposing to actually encode those things, probably we can have a profile of JCard, which we wouldn't specify in this call info document. We'd specify in the RCD document, right? That would say, well, here's a kind of minimal representation that gets you what you want, specifies these URLs that you encode that and stick it into a parameter or a header in SIP. It won't be too much worse than, your passports already are.
Right.
So, I mean, that's, the alternatives are we figure out some way to hack it into the header, we stick it in a MIME body, or use a data URL. We're not using a goddamn data URL. My dead body.
Brian Rosen, this is probably not what you want, but I'll just make you aware that for the emergency call services, we created a thing called additional data, which can hold currently it's an X card, but we want to make a J card version of that anyway, so we would help you do that. We do allow direct in the body or URI indirect, but that thing exists if you wanted to use it. Call info. Yeah.
The other thing is I didn't get a chance to ask, I see Howell's online, if that's addressed in EC name or not. If she wants to comment now, or I can ask offline. I'd be a little curious there too. The other topic. So yeah, no further comments on that. Everybody's sort of happy with us going down that rabbit hole. Okay.
I took it as you can go down that rabbit hole.
Exactly. The other one is a topic I've gotten the request, and I've seen it actually used in the industry where people are putting things like call reason and some other things that are maybe more specific to the call versus specific to the caller. And, you know, the first instinct was, oh, let's just stuff it all in RCD. But I think we want to sort of purposefully think about, you know, things that are related to caller versus, you know, information that's part of the call. I know Henning has a call info thing that's related to like typing the caller and, or, you know, like what side of the fence is that on? So just curious if people have opinions on that topic. Do you are you going back to the?
No, I have something from the Jabber room.
Yeah.
Hala asks, what is not addressed in eCNAM?
I don't know. That was my question to Hala. I didn't get a chance to take a look at the draft, but the question is, are all the, if I believe it's using call info, and I guess the question is, you know, are they all externally referenced data, or is there some way that the data has actually been incorporated into the header or not?
Yeah, John Peterson again. Yeah, it's you know, to the degree that ECNAM like incorporates things like logos, like how does it do it, and in particular, how's the whole structure that like, you know, the URLs to logos and so on exist in, encoded in call info, right? I think that's the question. And this is an attempt to really just look at what the encoding structure should be for this. And it would be great if this is a point where we could actually be aligned just on the encoding structure.
Yeah, just looking to see if that problem has already been addressed somewhere else, then, you know, or I mean, if it's just using standard call info, then that's fine too.
I mean, the thing Brian was talking about, the additional info, that actually sounds pretty promising, probably. I'll take a look at it. But yeah, I am really interested in this question of what call info really means and what JCard really means. Because like, JCard is just vCard, right? And vCard is a way that you describe someone's like contact information and related stuff about who a person is. And like there does seem to be a fundamental distinction between like the function of card and the function of, you know, things like reason, which are not about who this entity is that is placed in the call. It's really, that's more like caller info at the end of the day, like the stuff that's in card. When you get into what the call reason is, I think it could potentially be an entirely separate, a component of entirely separate data structure. There are a couple other examples of things that work along these lines that I can think of. One of them is URLs for interacting outside the call, usually post-call interaction is the kind of thing that, you know, like an enterprise want to be able to deliver to an end user so that they can like click a URL after a call, or even if they didn't answer the call. And those things aren't like JCard or, you know, vCard. They're something that is specific to who that particular entity is, that and really what the call was about. And that seems to be the same for call reason. So just architecturally, I think both of these things can fall within the scope of RCD, of rich call data. A component of rich call data is who is this joker who is placing this call? And all the things that are kind of JCard-ish will help answer that component of it. It just could be there's a need for a separate data structure, I think, that it would still be under the RCD rubric, but would cover things like call reason. That do just seem to be kind of like architecturally separate. And it would just seem like weird to hack JCard for like call reason, right? Because like it's JCard is like, you know, supposed to tell you who this person is. It's not supposed to tell you like, you know, why they're calling. It's not, I think, supposed to be dynamic that way. But, you know, this, if anybody else has any views about whether kind of vCard should be extensible to this, is it more dynamic than I think it is, and I've just kind of missed this over the years, or does it make sense to have this kind of separation between what, you know, who with the caller info and the call info?
Brian Rosen channeling the HALA in the Jabber room. The info parameter delivers plain text metadata, but utilizes the data URL scheme of RFC 2397 to include the CNAME plus information in the call info header info parameter. Being a terminating service, we don't have the same concerns on hacking.
Right. So, Colin Jennings, just discussing what John was talking about there with the vCard. vCard was designed that all of the data in it was mergeable in other things. So it was persistent and savable. And putting this type of information in vCard would break the mergeable semantics of vCard. So, I mean, I totally support it being in something separate. It doesn't map to the, I mean, it'll be a problem if you try and stuff it in vCard. I don't know enough about JCard, but presumably those same problems map
It's just a direct mapping. Yeah, it's just a JSON version. The other thing I was going to bring up too is like I can see definite use cases of, you know, especially thinking about the integrity stuff. You know, the person or the company or whatever never changes, but you know the reason for the call does change, and so you may want even separation of the integrity part as well. So we might want to think about that as well.
Yeah, I know. John Peterson again. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think one thing I would be interested in knowing is if anybody thinks there's anything we can steal for this. Like, is there something out there already that communicates roughly what call info means versus what caller info means? That, and I'm not sure there would be in the IETF, but maybe like outside the IETF. I mean, is there something in like some like Etsy Typhon, you know, like I don't know what it is, but like somewhere that someone has actually looked at, you know, metadata that's associated with the call that's intended to convey things like reason, but in an extensible data structure that we could just incorporate into this the same way we're just stealing JCard. Because if not, we're gonna have to hack it ourselves. That's my point.
Right.
And like, you know,
Reason or intent would be another phrase.
reason, intent, but like I said, it's gonna include things like your URL for post-call interaction. There's gonna be like a bunch of stuff that we're gonna be able to put into that, and so it'd have to be something that's relatively extensible. Anybody have any ideas? CDRs, that's not bad. What we found, yeah, what you have in CDRs? I mean, probably not things that were intended for display to the called party. I think that's, yeah, not URLs for post-call interactions, but there might be some things in there like it. I don't know. Well, if anybody thinks of anything, like let us know, because otherwise, pretty much, we're gonna have to like make something new for this.
I mean, it probably has to be something where, you know, obviously we want to support at a minimum text, but then, you know, it may be an image, it may be other things as well. So that's probably along the lines of what we want as an extensible object that can have different definitions of keys with specific purposes, and then the media, whether it's text or images or whatever. But we don't want to go to like HTML or anything like that, I would assume. Or maybe we do, I don't know. Okay. I think that was all the topics I wanted to talk about today. So thank you.
Okay, John, I think you're going to talk about the OOB.
Nice. These ones are quick too. We're actually making good progress getting through this. We're totally not going over. We totally don't need an interim meeting to follow this. This is fantastic. Next slide. This is really just saying what has transpired with these two documents since they escaped the working group. Our benevolent overlord, Mr. Roach, took a hard look at the divert and OOB documents, got some very handy nits in OOB, and some more serious things in div, which I'll talk about in a moment. But in addition to Adam's comments, actually, as more people have been looking at OOB, and this is kind of like a thing now, turns out, one piece of feedback that I've gotten loud and clear is there needed to be more text about mitigation for this callback service substitution attack, which is detailed in the document now. This is a case where an OOB, right, where, you know, if a call is coming in to a target and you want to try to impersonate a call to a target, if you as the attacker have some way of predicting that like an enterprise you want to impersonate is already placing a call to the person that you want to impersonate them to. You can like do a race condition against them, right? And if your call wins, then when the called party's phone rings, they'll go talk to the CPS where passports are stored in the out-of-band model. They'll get this passport that tells them, oh, a call exactly like looks just like your call is actually in progress at the moment. Fantastic. And so I know that it must be you. I think this is an extremely difficult attack to practically execute. The only conditions under which it seems remotely plausible are callback services. These are cases where if you imagine a big enterprise like American Express or something has a number that or maybe even a web page that you can put in and say, hey, please call me, have an agent call me at the following number. And if you are an attacker and you did like 10,000 practice calls and timed them against a random selection of numbers that you control and got a good sense of exactly how long it took for their callback service to like emit a call, maybe then I could predict, right? When I'm doing the callback to Adam, then I could, put Adam's number into American Express's webpage, say, call me, wait 1.37 seconds, launch my call and beat American Express's call to Adam at just the time American Express provisioned their passport to the CPS. So we put in some more text about mitigation for that. There are a couple of ways to mitigate it. The main ones are reducing the window in which the passport is actually available in the CPS, including potentially putting it in after you place the call. The text is said for some time, first you put your passport in CPS and then you place your call. And you can reduce the window on that side. And also, the other thing it talks about is doing some kind of post-call coordination. And this is based on the exposure of call state information on both sides of the call. And what this requires really is that the enterprise, if it calls and the Android phone says, hey, I'm connected, and the enterprise says, I'm not connected, I got a busy signal, or I got sent a voicemail, then you know that there's shenanigans, that somebody won the race condition. And if you're super paranoid about this, then you can implement things like that. What would be much simpler to implement is a random timer that gives you about 2 seconds of leeway in how long your callback service takes to execute its calls. You did that on the enterprises at a hundredth of the expense of implementing any other things that I just described, you would make this attack impossible. But that much said, we have some more mitigation stuff about that in there, and we're getting some preliminary data even about how common predictable callback services really are. I don't think they're actually very common. In my experience, most callback services already have 30 seconds worth of like random delay to them just because of human interactions and things like that. But there's some text in there to make those people feel better. We also added some text about discovering a CPS through provisioning as opposed to having some kind of service discovery function, because in a lot of the toy implementations of OOB that are out there today, they're happening in more closed environments, right? They're happening in these more enterprise-ish environments. And as a consequence of that, you really can just provision, well, this is my CPS. You don't need to figure out who the CPS is for a caller that you have no pre-association with. You're doing this in a much more constrained environment. So those have been added in addition to the nits that Adam pointed out that I very much appreciate. Next slide. On div, so I fixed the example. Oh, sorry, Chris.
Yeah, just one quick question. So I assume when you mean provision, you mean that CPS is protected as well in terms of access, or?
Yeah, this would be, effectively in those cases, the CPS would probably authenticate both parties, right. The person putting it in, putting out. It's an intranet environment where you can assume that security association. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So on div, I fixed the examples. We had some temp examples in there that really needed to be repaired. They are hopefully now correct. They are hot from a actual implementation that hopefully is working. There's a bit more discipline in JSON language. This is something Adam pointed out, that there was really sloppy usages of like arrays and values and elements and things like that. Whereas I tried to put in stricter language that is correct to how you're supposed to talk about JSON. And Adam also pointed out that the language about how many divs you need per redirection in these cases where you have kind of multiple baseline divs in a single passport. For example, I know Martin's going to talk about RPH. If you have one RPH passport, one shaken passport that are in the same, invite, you want to make sure that you don't end up having like exponential multiplication of these if you go through multiple redirections. And so the language is hopefully clear now that there will be one non-div passport for each baseline passport without a common origin dest in the message. That may be a lot to unpack when I actually say it, but the language in the draft I think is clear about this and no longer suggests this is an exponential multiplication problem. And I think that resolves the issues as Adam saw them of the major ones, I hope. So let me know if there's anything more there. I did also, and I don't have this on the slide, I know there's been some concern in Addis that because of like attended transfer sorts of use cases, we should make the window more generous for passport expiry in these div cases. And these are cases where we're using like third-party call control or something like that, where you put a call in to someone and you're basically parked talking to an agent, and then that agent 3PCCs you out to another party, but wants to reuse the original passport that you used to call that agent at the start. So there's some guidance in there now that suggests, yeah, in these cases, if you have a trust relationship between ultimately the transfer target and the transferring entity, it's probably safe to have a little bit more flexibility about like how old the original passport was that entered into the call. Martin.
Martin Dolly, AT&T. Well, an example of that is in support of 911 for transfer, where you end up at an agent. That agent stays on the call and then forwards the original signing to the ultimate destination for verification there. So there's an example of some type of relay type function.
Sure. I mean, of course, these problems all go away if you use refer instead of 3PCC, which would be great. But here we are, and it's 2020 in a few weeks, and we still aren't really using refer the way we're supposed to. So given that seems to be the situation and there's nothing we can do about it, I relax that interval, and you can be more generous with kind of stale passports for that. Next slide. Oh yeah, I seem to have a slide about this every time. So I did send a note to the list a couple weeks ago talking about whether we should bother to errata 8224 over this issue of whether you need quote marks around the PPT values in the identity header parameter. This is something that I'll admit the text in 8224 is not particularly helpful. And we have baked into, however, the RPH draft and the div draft doing this with quotes around the values for PPT. This has induced me at least to be like, let's make it firmly crooked that way. And I think the mailing list traffic about this, I got like 3 responses, and it was like 2 were like, yeah, just quote it, and 1 was like, nah, don't quote it. If anybody else wants to like find that thread and reply and say like what they want, that would be helpful. And I would then be happy to errata this to whatever people want, but I really didn't feel like there was enough like consensus around what we should actually do.
This is Chris. I probably can't adequately recall what the comment was, but I did get some comments internally that were sort of saying the ABNF in 3261 don't allow for quotes. I don't know if David recalls that and maybe can make a better comment than I can. But
that would be a factor, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Is that true? Did the ABNF of 3261 preclude having parameters in SIP be quoted? You did the ABNF, Brian. Do you remember?
I'm trying to remember.
Look it up, please. I'm just curious. We've got a few minutes here, so feel free to look it up. Cullen has a comment while we're getting down to it.
I mean, doesn't this problem go back to, 4424?
Does it?
Look, I don't know. I have the vague memory it does. And if it does, you can't break everything that's been done since 2006. Like, you've got to leave it like it is.
You mean 4474?
Sorry, 4474.
Well, no, but we're not, I think, really constrained by what people did in 4474. I mean, I'm sure it does, right? I'm sure that's exactly why it's this way, because we did something like in 2006 and we just cloned it for this, but
it means that given this replaces, not updates that, it means like you can't have everybody that's producing those identities that hasn't upgraded to the latest. I mean, you have to have backwards compatible at some level with that, or you're going to break every identity on every of these things, and it'll be
Right.
100% reason why every vendor will go, we're not deploying that because it breaks our stuff.
Yeah.
It'll be the excuse we all need not to
I
do it.
know it'll be all the SBC vendors who will be like, wait, I was compliant with this way that identity worked and PPT. Well, we didn't have PPT and
It's worse than that. I mean, I'm not sure this is a problem, but I mean, if it comes up that as soon as you turn this on, as soon as you install one new SBC, every one of my old phones displays the identity of the call is broken with a broken lock icon. People will turn it off.
I'll tell you, this is absolutely the number one thing from interoperability testing that is a problem, is that some people are doing it quoted, some people are doing it unquoted, and there are apparently some implementations that just refuse to accept quoted, and even though that's what we wrote into the div and the RPH specs. It's in the examples, is everything in there. And so, yeah, if we're going to change this, we should change it now and then fix it in div so that it's not quoted, because right now it's quoted, right? So, Brian, do you have a verdict for us on? Double quotes are allowed, okay. Oh, really? Well, we don't escape them.
That's where you're talking about using.
In a parameter, a header parameter. Yeah. I think we do too. I think we do too.
I don't think it's a problem. I'll make sure.
Okay. I mean, here's my real point. I think we need some consensus around this. I know we took a hum about this last year, and we all agreed we're going to do this quoted. And then everybody keeps freaking out about, but the ABNF that's in 8224 doesn't look like it works that way. And as long as there's an agreement, we're going to do it quoted. We'll errata it, right? But I mean, I'm trying to build enough of a consensus that it is worth doing an errata.
We have a bunch of remote people. Please use the mic.
So, with this, I'm saying that 1.5 years back, I think we did that and it, for RPH, I can tell that it was not quoted, then we put that quoted, so.
So my inclination would be to errata this, provided it is not illegal in RC 3621 to say that these things are supposed to be quoted, just because we've already baked it into RPH, which is already out, right? So we'd be errating that too if we're going to reverse it. And
Right. Adam Roach, and this is just as an individual contributor. When I think about the way that we want to address this, and this sort of came up when you're talking about the interop issues that people are concretely encountering, I think we probably want something a little more complex than we could do in just a simple errata. We might want as a very short document that says when you generate these, put quotes around it. When you receive them, you need to be able to handle both.
well, and that's what we're advising implementers to do in the field, is that. So yes.
Right. So if that's what we want people to
Okay.
do, then we want to formalize
Yeah,
that. And I
yeah.
think that probably goes well beyond the spirit of what errata are supposed to represent.
Okay. We can find an
So
occasion to
you're
do that.
calling for an update?
You're calling for an
I'm
update?
calling for a one-page
Sold.
updates document.
Sold. We'll do it. Again, provided that nobody's going to come and say, well, but it should be unquoted, man.
Right. Well, and what's nice about that is it gives us a lot more. We know what the process is for taking an internet draft and pushing it out the door, and it's going to make this a lot less
Okay.
fiddly than well, we did talk about we want an errata, and then it falls between the cracks. because it's
Actually,
not-
you're entirely correct, Mr. Roach. That is an excellent suggestion. It will give everyone an opportunity to speak now or forever hold their peace, and we'll pass it as a consensus document. Sold. Next slide. There's much more. I hear OB is coming soon to a telechat near you. I think we do now that we have the framework and architecture for OOB out. I suspect there will be some new documents that are going to talk about these very specific use cases in which people want to use OOB. There's the public option. I've heard a lot of people interested in trying to figure out how to do public OOB. And public OOB is really cool, and it could be meaningful for a number of solutions out there in the universe. I am not going to do all this work myself, especially not in the public option. But if there is a will to get those things done, then I will certainly pitch in. The private option is the one that I think is more interesting, is kind of what some of these more enterprise-ish use cases look like. Maybe the enterprise is interacting with that smartphone app, things like that. Those I think are, because they are practically starting to appear in the field now. This is not hypothetical. We probably do have enough data to standardize something narrow about what the guidance should be for that use case, which we did not have when we were building this framework and architecture. So I'd expect we'll probably at least see that one coming down the pike relatively soon. Anything else people want to say about this? Any more we should be?
I just have one question. Where's that update going to be processed? This doesn't seem like the right place.
The update to 8224 on
Adam's.
You want to AD sponsor it, Adam?
Adam Roach, yeah, that's what I was going to say is, if we think we can get this out the door by March, I'm happy to go ahead and try to push it forward.
Right.
And I obviously could hand it off after that. But ideally, we'd have it done, before I'm gone.
Yeah, I mean, again, if it's a one-page document, and then you can just pump it out.
So you'll have it done by the end of the week?
Yes, thank you, Russ. Do you have any more? I don't think I do. Any more slides? I think I'm good.
Okay, so it seems like the next step got added during the discussion was my point. Okay.
Let the minutes reflect, communicator, that.
Okay. John, you talked about divert as well already, right?
Yes.
It was one slide deck. That's what I remembered. Okay, Martin, you're up.
Token allows single button. There's a lot of things about 3261. Maybe that.
Okay, the Nina ESIF community, made a request of the IPN&I for signing of the RPH for civil 911 calls for ESINet. Similarly to what we did for government priority services, ETS, WPS. And so, next slide. Okay, so in the first signing RPH for government priority services, we built upon the 8225 for inclusion of a cryptographically signed RPH header field. There, a registry was created so that additional new assertions would be easier for standardization within IANA. And so what this document here provides new assertions for emergency services call origination and emergency services callback. And so the new assertion values are ES.org for the emergency services origination and ES callback for emergency services callback. We had a conversation at the last IPN&I meeting. So the example I gave at the mic, where you make an emergency services call, you end up at an emergency service operator, but then needs to transfer you. And when they transfer you, it's not a hard transfer. They stay on the call, and it's more like a conference. And so we talked about, do we need a new assertion for that? And the answer would be no, because the original signing of the passport would be passed along during that transport process. Okay. And so that's the reason for not requesting a one for the transport case. Next slide. And so the syntax that we're proposing is for the orig TN, calling party number. Now, here's something where this can be either 911 or a URN, a service URN as in URN SOS.
Yeah, John Peterson, we need to fix that. Yeah, so that you can actually have that URN in there. This is another like short draft that somebody needs to do. Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily looking at you. We've talked about this before. Yes, I'm aware that there's a little bit of crufty text in 8224 that seems to imply this has to be like a SIP or SIP-S URL or whatever, basically. So yes, we will patch something. Now, you're welcome to do it in this draft if you want, to be honest. Like, I would be fine if somebody wants to take some existing draft and just have a section in there that says, by the way, this updates RFC 8224 to say that it's okay to put like an SOS URN into the desk field. I happy to help write text for that.
Yeah, we actually had a discussion about a related topic. I don't know, Martin, if you want to talk about that now or later. The fact that for cell phones that don't have SIM cards in them, you still need to support 911, and there's no telephone number associated. So what do you do for Orig when there's no telephone number? And I was wondering, is there something that can represent unknown, like a URN or something like that? Or should we make something up? Or curious.
Brian Rosen, you want an ID, not just unknown. It doesn't have to be a telephone number, but there needs to be some other ID.
That was part of the discussion that we had in IPN and I, Brian, that there would be something that would syntactically mean, it's not that it's anonymous, but that the originating carrier can't verify the identity of the originator of the call.
I guess my question is, do you want something like an IMSI or IMEI that actually is uniquely identifiable? Or you just want something that says like, it's okay that I vouch for this person?
I heard Martin say he can't vouch for the person.
You can't vouch for the person, but you can vouch for the device, which is all you ever vouch for. All that the emergency services guys care about is that two calls from the same uninitialized phone have the same identifier.
Okay,
that's all they care about.
Okay, so let's take a step back. Under what does you know and why do you think you know it? This is not your subscriber, so you have no knowledge of their IMEI or any identifier whatsoever.
Yeah, they have to associate with the GSM network, whatever, right? Or it's CMA network. And so there's a low-level network identifier that they utilize that's unique in order so that you can like signal the radio, right? I mean,
The device knows that. The service provider network doesn't know that.
Doesn't know that.
Yeah, but I think that's okay, right? We're just saying that you need some unique identifier that, I guess, would that be used for callback or?
No, it's not used for callback.
It's for call origination.
Yeah, it's for origination only. It's
Right.
just to identify that two calls from the same phone are from the same phone. So all they care about is that we know that they're from the same phone.
Correct.
You don't know anything else.
so in other words, if we created or just maybe we can reuse some existing like URN, right, that just contains some just a UID of some kind
Right.
that is going to be created by the service providers, that would be sufficient for this function. Okay. But let's just figure out exactly what that URN should be. I'm sure there's something we can reuse for this.
So it does. So for the callback for the same phone, is it that then the operator will ask that a callback number?
No. So basically for callback is you make a call, but for whatever reason you get disconnected.
Correct.
And so now the emergency network is calling you back.
Right.
Okay, so like if you dial 911 and hang up,
Right.
And then you actually got to the PSAP, the PSAP's going to call you back, and that's what we're referring to as callback here.
Correct. But I think I agree with what Chris mentioned, right? if I have no phone number associated with my device, right? I do not have a subscription, then I make the call. Then how do I get the call back?
There's an identifier. Okay. There's a node, and I'll let Brian speak to it. He knows the architecture better than I do.
Brian Rosen, so at least at the moment, and I don't think the carriers are promising anything new, you can't call back in an uninitialized
Right.
device. And I don't think anybody's asking for that. I don't think the network can do that.
Right.
So that isn't, it doesn't matter. You can't call it back.
Okay, and that is it. Thank you.
So, is this a document that people want to adopt? And obviously, we'll take it to the list regardless of the answer in this room. But go ahead.
Yeah, John Peterson. Yes, I think it is. And, my only question about it is, we've talked about a couple of other things. It sounds like it might be useful to specify along with this.
Right.
Do we kind of need a STIR working group document that is how to do STIR for emergency services that contains this and that stuff, all the different URN stuff we need to do? And because it just seems like there's a bucket of stuff that needs to be done. Or do you just want to kind of do this alone and have another document that is going to specify, okay, here's where URN SOS lives, how that should work with DAST and things like that? That's really a question for Martin in terms of just how you want to organize this.
I think there's a follow-up question, which is, are there other places that the URN SOS would appear than just a passport?
Well, yeah, so that it exists, and there's specification already for how to use URN SOS and
That's what I
baseline SIP.
thought. So,
Yeah. So I mean, the point is, this is just specifying what the procedure, there may be unique AS and VS procedures that are associated with receiving a call for URN SOS, right? And I had to write them for div, I had to write them for OOB, and I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't something unique about the way this was supposed to work. And some of the things we've just been talking about suggest to me that there probably is. So I guess my question is, do we want a more kind of general document that talks about how we're going to deal with emergency services situations in STIR, or do we kind of just want to do this tactically and assume that then some other document will reference this, where it actually describes more of how you do emergency services overall?
Brian Rosen, just to be clear, the URN typically is not in 2. It's typically in, well, it doesn't matter what's in 2. What matters is in the request URI. That's where it is, the request URI.
Just one more thing to note, and so this doesn't look like it's going to come seriously in serial form. The other namespaces in the RPH name, one is for, I think there's 2 defined for mission critical push to talk, which is the responder. So in the U.S. that would be for FirstNet, and I've been trying to reach out to see if they would want, signing of RPH for their calls, and I haven't gotten a positive answer. And the examples there would be, there's a Katrina event, and someone is calling from the event to Washington to FEMA, as an example. Now, they may also be a GETS WPS user, which would likely be the signing that could occur, but they don't necessarily have to be, and therefore, do they want priority handling for those calls?
Brian Rosen, no, being involved with this particular set of folks involved in FirstNet, and they don't have a clue. And your inclination here is 100% correct. Of course they want to have this.
Right.
Yes, we're going to have to do this. Probably also going to have to do the DoD one.
And there's a whole set for DoD. Yeah, there's a meeting in January with MITRE, and I'm going to be talking on 5G security, and I'll bring that up there to see what they say.
So my intuition is that this could go first, and all that other stuff needs to be sorted out and could come later, just to not to get the parts we know are stable done. Does anyone see it differently? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time.
All right, we're at the any other business part of the agenda. Is there any? Okay, so two decisions were that we're going to have a working group last call on delegated certs after the new year, and we're going to have a call for adoption of the document that Martin just briefed. All right.
I'll say one more thing too, John Peterson, which is like now that delegation and OB are wrapping up in addition to doing future OB stuff, one thing that I am hearing more about in the industry that I feel probably does need to come back is connected identity, actually. This is something that we floated an initial draft about like a year or so ago, but hasn't been on the front burner. But these are all the use cases where you want to try to figure out when you're placing a call who you've actually reached, and to be able to use stir in the backwards direction rather than the forwards direction. And there are a couple of variations on this, including doing pre-call stir checks of various kinds. If you have a telephone number that you know you're about to call, that you can see in a UI, actually be able to see like RCD data associated with who it is you're calling before you press call, and to know that it's secure, things like that. This is something that is already hinted at in the connected identity draft that was submitted like a year or so ago. This is something that I'm hearing some more pressure from in the marketplace, so that will probably come back next time.
Thank you. Have a good week.
So yeah, I mean, it's, you know, the approach to those call cases. Yeah, I know. It's, pros and cons. Trying to find context for these reps. And I work that and there's a couple of ways that I realize is you really want to I want that I mean, I appreciate it. Exactly. I want to try to get values of time. 78.